Pawn shop workers of Reddit, what is the dumbest thing a customer has brought in thinking they were going to strike it rich? Story 1. I am a store manager at one of the busiest pawn shops in Northern California. And because of that, I have a high volume of customers that most don't have, so that means lots of stories. 1. A guy brought in a stone-painted green claiming it was ancient gold, and that after eons it had developed a patina. I tried to explain to him that all gold is ancient gold made in something as intense as a Death Star colliding, but he insisted it was gold. After about 30 minutes of discussion, he forced me to test it, and when I showed him it wasn't gold, he told me he spent $4,000 buying it from some guy. 2. A guy brought in a bag of used syringes and wanted to trade it for a TV. I did not oblige. 3. A guy brought in a piece of safety glass from a windshield and claimed it was a diamond even when I assured him it wasn't. 4. Someone brought in a clump of bent and slightly melted forks and spoons claiming it was a meteorite fallen from the ISS, International Space Station trash dump shot into space. 5. As a watch guy, this is my favorite. Someone brought in a Rolex watch claiming their father gave it to them. When I showed her that it actually said Rolflex and skis made, she claimed that those were misprints and meant it was worth more because of it. After I opened the watch to show her the movement, I saw that there was no movement at all but just a weight in the back. 6. A couple came in with an old 1990 30 inches TV claiming that it was antique and refused to leave the store until we gave them $800 for it. We showed them selling online for literally a couple of dollars, but they refused and said they knew what they had. 7. Not in line with a crazy item, but a good story. A couple used to come in once a week and pawn stuff. Well, apparently one day the wife decided she was done with him as a husband, snuck up behind him in the store, sprayed him in the face with pepper spray, stole his car keys and his wallet, ran out of the store and stole his car. 8. Someone came in with an obviously recently used dialysis machine, still had blood sprayed on it as they ripped it away while it was in use, I don't know, and tried to sell it for thousands of dollars. We passed. Story 2. I didn't work at a pawn shop, but at a secondhand movie, music, video game, comic, and toy store in Kansas City called Vintage Stock. Games. Everyone knows this one. People would buy a game at GameStop and come in a couple of weeks later and expect us to give them $40 cash or $55 in trade-in for a $60 that tanked. Or people would try and sell us a 5-year-old Madden game and be insulted at the 25 cents trade-in we offered for a game we knew was going to sit on our shelf. My favorite was the woman who bought 10 copies of Final Fantasy VII Greatest Hits and thought we would pay $100 bucks for each one. Sure, if you brought in Suikoden 2 or Luna, we might offer you a nice chunk of change, but if it got the Greatest Hits release, not so much. Comics and toys. Every father regretted not keeping his Action Comics one, and every mother lamented not having the original Barbie, but in the late 80s and 90s, they started mass-producing that shit. 15-year-old comics and toys have almost no value. Death of Superman and your 100 Beanie Babies are not worth our time. Sports paraphernalia. Unless you can prove Joe Montana signed that football or George Brett signed that card, we can't take it. At least for what you are asking. The Brett Favre rookie card is neat, but why did you use it as a coaster for your coffee mug? A signed hockey stick? Get the f*** out, this is Kansas City. We don't know what a hockey stick looks like. Movies and music. In the early to mid-2000s, when Netflix mailed you movies and Steam didn't exist, all media was physical, or downloaded off Kazaa. That didn't mean we would give you $5 for every DVD and $3 for every CD. Nobody wants to buy Yanni's Greatest Hits, and we already have 16 copies of Spider-Man 2. Garage sale mums would come in with trash bags full of random crap and expect to make a living off of it. We would sort through so much crap over the summer, because a bored stay-at-home mum thought giving the grandma down the block a check for $20 for every DVD at her sale would net her hundreds of dollars. The big secret, which shouldn't be a secret, is that secondhand stores are still in it to make a profit. If the Beckett Guide says your card is worth $30, we're not going to give you $30. If we can sell your scratched corn CD for $5, we are going to give you $1.50 cash and a $3 trade-in if we are feeling very, very generous. That Star Wars figure might be worth $500, and you only want $300, but if it's going to sit in the display case for a decade, we won't buy it. We want to make money, and if there is no demand, we will lowball you enough that hopefully you leave. Since I left, I heard they went to a standard buy trade value, but when I worked there, it was up to the manager, and the manager at the time kinda let the people who knew about the product determine the price. Yes, I massively undercut the obvious head woman who somehow found a copy of Risk for the PS1, PlayStation 1. Yes, I would buy a bulk bag of magic cards because I knew that if we started to price them, they would discover the few ones that are actually worth something. But 95% of the time, people that bitched about what we were offering sold us crap that's still sitting in a clearance bin. Story 3. Worked at a traditional game store. Had plenty of sketchy white trash people coming in with their kids' old Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic cards thinking they were extremely valuable. Usually, it was just a mismatched starter set from the early 2000s or the like. I'm not sure what started the idea that old trading cards were going to be ridiculously valuable, but no, I won't give you money for your dark magician. The level of disappointment, and oftentimes outright anger on their part, was difficult to deal with. I began just telling trashy-looking people, who weren't store regulars, that we didn't purchase cards. Did once have a guy bring in a collection that had a gnarly-looking Black Lotus. Gave him a good deal for it. Story 4. Not a pawn shop worker, but this is still kind of a cool story, or at least I think. Either way, both the shop owner and I were happy with the events that went down. I used to frequent yard sales, buy vintage items, and then take them to the antique shop and make a little money on the side. One day I found this little glass figurine at a yard sale for 25 cents. When I flipped the item over and saw the red Occupied Japan logo, I got extremely excited and bought it on the spot. I took it over to the shop and sold it for $45. The shop owner wouldn't go any higher, but hey, I made $44.75 off a quick purchase, so I wasn't too worried. The figure was actually worth about $125. Either way, I made money, and that figure is still sitting in his shop for sale at $125. Story 5. I don't work in a pawn shop, but I bought my first guitar in one. The big defense contractor in my town laid off over 10,000 people overnight, and the contagion spread. I was looking for my first guitar, and I'm cheap. After checking the music stores, I hit up the pawn shops near work. While I'm looking, this clean-cut guy in his early 30s comes in trying to pawn his guitar, hard case, and effects. Since the shop had a bunch, they offered him crap, evidently, and he left. He was almost crying, saying he got laid off and had to pay some bills. I followed him out and asked him what he wanted for it. He said $100, and I took it. I also gave him my phone number and said he could buy it back when he got back on his feet. I never heard from him. I'm looking at it now, unplayed for months. I hope everything worked out for him. Story 6. I worked at a pawn shop for about 6 years. I once had a customer walk up to the counter and slide a gold coin to me and say, "I think this is gold, man." This particular customer reeked of bile and looked like he was high on everything possible. I looked at the coin and slid it back to him and replied, "I think it's a Chuck E. Cheese token. I can tell by the mouse on it." He just said, "Oh," and walked away. That was when I noticed he had his pants to the point it was almost all the way down his pant leg. Story 7. People came in all the time thinking they could sell or pawn something for almost as much as they bought it new. Our policy was generally to buy for 25% of the new price, and only higher if it was an interesting or high-value item. I always hated jewelry because you just knew the person was going to get pissed at your lowball offer. I paid $10K for this at the jeweler's, and here's the receipt and insurance certificate. Unfortunately, we go by the weight of the gold, which has a fluctuating market price, and the size and quality of the diamond. Going by our rates, I can't offer more than $200, and I can't blame them for feeling insulted. It sucks, because while some people pawn stuff to feed their drug habit, which sucks for them too, you know, many of them do it because their power is going to be shut off, or they can't afford food for their kids, or their husband's medical bills are slowly creeping up, and hell, I haven't worn this ring for years. Who cares if my grandmother gave it to me? It gotta be worth thousands, or the 100 other reasons poverty blows. But you have to sit there and be stubborn because you're poor too, and your shit-faced boss will deduct anything overpaid from your check. Pawn shops give you cool stories, but it crushes your soul. Story 8. I worked in a pawn shop in the Midwest for a year and a half. We had a very large woman bring in this bizarre-looking machine. She sets it on the counter and says, "I want $500 for it." We're just staring at the machine and then looking at her, and finally the pawnbroker goes, "What is it?" "Homemade breast pump." "Yeah, this woman made her own breast pump and thought she would get $500 for it." So many people try to bring in their tattoo guns, equipment. I don't know if other pawn shops take stuff like this, but any in my area is a hard pass due to bodily fluid. And some of these people get pissed when you tell them no, screaming about how they spent $6,000 on this and how can we not take it. We had this guy who would dig through garbage cans and try to bring us stuff to sell. Not uncommon, but it was very obvious that this shit was straight up from a dumpster and he dug it out like 10 minutes before he walked into the store. One time we had to kick him out because he was losing his mind over the fact we wouldn't give him $15 for a desk lamp that had a broken bendy neck. Even though the pawnbroker pulled up the exact lamp on Target's website selling for $10 not broken, this guy just did not get it and was calling us all b****s and cunts over it. One of my favourites is the lady who called asking if we take books. We told her we'll consider collector item books, but before we could explain, she got all excited and hung up saying that's exactly what she had. Now, when I say collector's items, I mean first editions or one of those special edition movie books or whatever. This lady proceeds to come and ask for help carrying in her 10, yes, that's right, 10 totes of collector books. These collector books, 10-cent romance novels that you can buy in bulk from any thrift store. The conversation was the following. The pawnbroker, ma'am, these are not collector's items. We can't give you anything for them. Lady, what do you mean? They are collector's items. They are all from the same publisher and everything. Pawnbroker, yeah, that's not what makes them collector's items. I'm sorry, we will not take these items. You could consider donating them to a thrift store. Lady, are you kidding me? Do you know how many years I've spent cherishing these? They are collector's items. I am a collector and I collected these. Pawnbroker, I'm sorry, ma'am. Lady, I will not be leaving this store until I get at least $300 for my collection. We ended up having to call the police because she sat in the parking lot for 5 hours, ranting and raving about us and how we were a scam. The last straw for my boss is when she opened the door and screamed at the top of her lungs like a 5-year-old and then slammed the door. Story 9. Worked at an auction house rather than a pawn shop, but it's the same principle. I once had to deal with a woman who brought in a badly damaged, chipped, dog-child-chewed, simple pine bookcase. She informed me that she had paid $200 for the bookcase 10 years ago, and that due to its appreciating value, she expected to receive at least $1,000 for it now. She was very put out when I suggested the most she was going to get was $20, and only if someone wanted it for their shed. Story 10. When I worked at Guitar Center, we would have people come in to sell us used gear all the time, which was cool. Usually they didn't expect too much for it, unless it was actually something good or rare or vintage. But people would hear that vintage guitars are worth good money and think, I bet that Squire I got in 1997 that is all crusty and old is worth something, and get mad when we would offer them $35 for it and sell it for $70 because it was gross, and somebody could buy a brand new one for $100 or $120 depending on if there was a sale. My favorite was the one guy who came in with 2 garbage guitars, I think one of them might have been a bass, that were missing strings and nuts and knobs. They weren't worth much even in good condition, but in the shape that they were in, it would cost more to get our in-house technician to repair them than he would get for them. Because we weren't in the business of buying broken instruments, we told him that if he wanted to sell them to us, he would have to have them repaired first. And I was completely upfront with him that the cost of the repairs would be more than we would pay him for the guitars. He decided to do it anyway, and gave me a big stink about how he drove half an hour to come here to do this, and it took an hour and a half out of his day, and how he felt like he should be compensated. When I called him the next day to tell him that the repairs were done and that we would be able to get him his money for the sale, he yelled at me over the phone for interrupting his golf game. F*** that guy. Story 11. I work at a used bookstore and had a customer come in with very good condition DVDs, books and CDs. Our old way of buying things used to be that we would judge every single object that came in based on condition and determine the price from there, usually around $1 if the book was in good condition. However, we now had a scanning system where we would scan a barcode and a price would be generated based on prices of it online, regardless of condition. Back to the customer. She's a scrawny old lady and looks pretty much like your stereotypical witch, but with a tank top and shorts. She comes into our store often and usually sells a few cartfuls of books and DVDs. With our old buyback system, her total would usually come out to around $70, a higher amount than most buybacks, and would sometimes throw a small fit if she didn't get enough. Now she comes in after we implement our new buyback system. She sells the usual, cartfuls of books and DVDs in really good condition. But now her total came to around $17, and she flipped her shit. She asked, "Why do you have to use this piece of bullshit buyback system?" and started calling us random slurs and insults. She also knocks her books down and calls us racist. "Just because I'm white, you gotta be racist against me. Why do I have this treatment?" She demanded to talk to the manager and he came. He told her that's just how it is now. You don't have to sell to us if you're not satisfied. He mentioned that the company had to change the system because we weren't buying books and stuff at an accurate price. Lady didn't want to take it and tried to shame us by telling everyone around her and the mall that we were racist against her and that she'll call the cops. She called the cops on us, but when they came, she instead got arrested for public disturbance and was subsequently banned from our store for some time. Story 12. Pawn shop manager here. Been in the pawn business for about 7 years. I've seen just about everything, but I have this one customer who takes the cake. A guy comes in to pick up the pressure washer that he has already pawned several times, signs that he has redeemed his item after checking it out, and says, "That's one. Have a great day." He then proceeds to walk out to his car with it and then promptly storms back into the store with it proclaiming it isn't his. I calmly try to figure out what the problem is as he is going ballistic. Turns out the serial number was put in our system incorrectly, so I could not prove it was his. I went ahead and informed him a mistake was made on our side and I would replace it with a new one from Home Depot. That was not okay. He then called me a bitch several times over, as well as a Never been called that. Had to Google it. Ended up having to call the police on him to have him 86'd from the premises. Turns out he's bipolar and doesn't take his meds. Recently, a young kid came in. He had a rare $1 coin. It was a United States $1 coin with Ulysses Grant on it. He claimed his grandfather gave it to him at birth, and he had it over 10 years before he was born. He supposedly found it on the internet for over $100. I had to be the bad guy and tell him the coin wasn't even minted until after 2000. And it was still only valued at $1 in the current condition it was in. I also have this lady customer who comes in with jewelry and wants close to the retail price. I struggle with her every time she comes in. One time I offered her $15 for a piece she had, and she told me, "Well, you're just going to turn around and sell it for over 30. I replied, "That's how it works, otherwise I wouldn't be in business." Story 13. I used to work in bicycle shops. Cyclists tend to think of their bikes as their pride and joy, and don't understand that they have no sentimental value to anyone else. We always warned customers that we couldn't offer much for used bikes and that they were better off selling them on their own, but hearing our offer they usually stormed out angry, calling us crooks under their breath anyway. We'd offer someone $300 for their bike. They'd protest they paid $1,000 for the bike a few years ago and spent almost as much on upgrades. We'd point out few people fit a 64 centimeters frame. Fluorescent colors are no longer popular. Their drivetrain was already almost obsolete, and their upgrades were so bizarre and random that we'd have to change them out to have any chance of selling it. We were still the crooks since we offered less than they spent on their bike. Story 14. Not a pawn shop owner, and only a second-hand story. One rich couple quite regularly went to a specialized pawn shop and pawned off their Rolls-Royce for a ridiculously small sum, and got it back 2 or 3 weeks later, usually with the original money envelope that they were given, and the fees, which were low because the loan was extremely small in comparison to the car's worth. Turned out that it was cheaper for them to turn to the pawn shop and pay the fees instead of getting a secure and insured garage while they were on holiday. Story 15. One dude brought in a bunch of those nuggets of fool's gold that every science museum gift shop sells, convinced they were gold. Similarly, a guy brought in one of those faux-aged copies of the Declaration of Independence that someone presumably bought at the Jefferson Memorial or Monticello. He was convinced it was a priceless artifact. A woman lugged in a Paul Reed Smith guitar with a signature on it that she swore was Jimi Hendrix's. She was very displeased when I informed her that Hendrix died several years before the PRS, Paul Reed Smith, company was founded. And there's just the general parade of bootleg handbags, gold teeth, fake flea market jewelry, counterfeit Rolex watches, white van speakers, and countless broken electronics. Story 16. I worked in a pawn shop for a short time to help a friend and his family out. This lady came in and just wanted an appraisal on her engagement ring. She told us her boyfriend gave it to her and said it cost him $3,500 and she didn't believe him. So I took it to the back and checked it out. Fake through and through, just costume jewelry. I gave it back to the lady and told her it was fake. She stormed out screaming how she was going to kill that butt. I felt kind of bad for the guy, hope he dodged that gold-digging bullet. Also, some guy came in wanting to sell some pieces of gold that still had bits of teeth stuck to them.